Why is clean eating so important? That's what we're going to talk about in this tutorial. We've got 4 points up on the screen. We're going to look at some symptoms, some dietary causes, some dietary solutions, and then basically what I would describe as like the anatomy of clean eating. So it's not just going to be a bunch of sort of trends or buzzwords that we're going to be talking about. We're going to dig deep into some anatomy and really understand what clean eating is, why we're doing it, and the effects of doing it as well. When we're talking about symptoms, as you can see on here, mild forms of toxic hepatitis may not cause any symptoms. So again, it's important to understand that symptoms are later on, and some of those symptoms, so as it says here, it may be detected. So the mild hepatitis or toxic hepatitis may be detected only by blood tests, for example. So we need to go and investigate that. But when signs and symptoms of toxic hepatitis occur, they may include yellow skin and whites of the eyes, which is the jaundice. You've got itching, abdominal pain, fatigue, loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, rash, fever, weight loss, dark or tea-coloured urine. So these symptoms are sort of further on down the chain. So that doesn't mean you aren't toxifying the body, because you may not get the symptoms straight away, which is a big part of the understanding, is the fact that we may not be getting the symptoms whilst it's happening. It's just the symptoms are a bit further down the line, and it's a warning sign to say this is now becoming a real problem. So what we're going to talk about next are some of the dietary causes that can cause this toxification and detoxification of the body, and then we'll look at the anatomy after that. The foods that can toxify, as I sort of making up a word there, but toxifying foods, as I call them: sugar, alcohol, trans fat. So they're your sort of processed foods, but 2 examples of that: cakes, biscuits, pastries, so on and so forth. So all of that, etc. And soft drinks. Now that's just 4 of them, but essentially we're talking about processed foods, numbers, all that kind of stuff is toxifying to the body. So these are the types of foods that we need to minimize. Now, I know what everyone's thinking. Oh, it's these foods again. Oh, it's the boring foods that are going to help us, and it's the nice, indulgent foods that are causing the problem. Now, again, there is something wrong with eating them, because you're toxifying the body, but done in the right amount. So on a very minimal amount, say, I don't know, for example, it doesn't mean that you have to do it once a month. If you're, let's just say, clean eating, as we're going to describe in a second, for 30 days of the month, and then one day you're eating these toxifying foods, then the body will be able to process that and, move it on through the system. But if we're doing the toxifying foods 30 days and then the detoxifying foods on just one day, then it's going to be a problem. But as we mentioned, the important thing is we may not be getting the symptoms to start with. So it's not about using symptoms as the sign, because they, in some respects, are coming not when it's too late, but it's coming when it's much further down the line. It's much more effective just to consume the detoxifying foods and the more healthy foods, because then we shouldn't get further down the line, if that makes sense. So when we're talking about some sort of detoxifying diet, now obviously you can read about detoxifying foods or anti-inflammatory foods, and that will help with that, and liver detoxing foods or foods that are good for the liver, all that kind of stuff will make up what I am sort of describing as this sort of detoxifying diet. But essentially we're talking about whole foods, mainly plant-based, organic where possible, because that keeps the chemicals out. If we can grow them locally, we get more nutrition from it. And again, drinking water, that is the in some respects the only second to breathing. That's the second most important substance that the body needs. So we need to be looking at it in this way, and we need to be able to keep this diet clean, so it keeps the liver clean, so it keeps our body, let's just say, at reduced risk or less likelihood of getting these symptoms when we are further down the line. Now for the anatomy, and what I'm going to describe now is essentially the path of food as it goes into the body and through up into the liver, and then what is the liver doing. So what happens is we consume food. So we put it in our mouth, we chew it, it goes down to what is called chyme, and then we swallow, goes down to the stomach, goes down into the intestines. Now, all of this is absorbed through the crypts of the intestines into the hepatic portal vein. So we would look at amino acids, proteins, monosaccharides, carbohydrates / sugars, fatty acids, fats, vitamins, and minerals. So all of those parts of the food are coming down into the body, being processed, and then absorbing into the bloodstream, which is the portal vein. Now, here we have the intestines and the crypts of the intestines. So what it's doing is absorbing through this layer, and it's going into this vein here. And then what it's then doing is it's then being transported up through into the liver to be detoxified. Now, this is the important bit. If we're putting in the cleaner foods, when it gets to the liver, it doesn't need to detoxify as much. If we're putting in the dirty foods, it needs to detoxify that much more, work that much harder, and that's when the problems can begin. Now it's gone past the intestines and it's starting to move up into, so you can see here, it goes from the sort of large and small intestine via this variety of sort of veins and things like that up into the liver. So it gets transported to the liver. So it's taken to the liver to be either stored, metabolized, or detoxified. So important for maintaining nutrient supply for cell metabolism. So basically, all that process is happening to get the nutrition where it's needed, or the nutrients into the body where it's needed for the body. If we're working out, to rebuild muscle tissue, if we're just living life, to supply the organs with the nutrition it needs, so on and so forth. So store and metabolize glycogen. Now again, we don't want to be storing too much because that can cause a problem in the liver. Same with fatty acids. We don't want to be storing too much in the liver. We want to be getting that food processed, so we need to be taking in the right amount. We need to be taking in the right foods so it can be metabolized and used by the liver. Any detoxification that needs to happen could happen at a minimal state, and then it can be taken where it needs to go. The problems start to occur as we see here. So another thing that we need to do, and obviously it metabolizes proteins and amino acids. So it will prepare that all for the body. That's essentially what metabolizing means. It's preparing it ready for the body. What then happens is it will filter out any toxins. So those poor foods that I talked about, they don't have a great deal of nutrition in them. But what they do have is a lot of toxification elements to them. Again, I'm sort of making up language here, but hopefully you're sort of following along. But filters toxins through sinusoid channels, which are lined with immune cells called Kupffer cells. I don't quite know the pronunciation of those, but I'll give it my best shot. So what's essentially happening is it's taking the toxins, putting it into, or using the immune system to then remove it from the body. Now, again, the problems occur when the immune system is just overtaxed. There's too much garbage for it to take out, so some of it has to get through the system because it can't cope with the volume and the amount. So what then happens is it then starts to become a problem. Then the liver starts to not work as effectively. Then if that continues over a prolonged period of time, then we start getting those symptoms that I talked about at the start. But that can be managed and rectified by doing a blood test to see if there is any of that happening, or it can be rectified just by simply not putting the foods in, because if you're not putting the foods in, it's then not needing to detoxify it, and it's then not needing to be sort of processed by the body, so it doesn't get overtaxed, which is in a sense sort of what I've just described here. So this is just a little bit of further explanation based on what I've just said, but it's a little bit more of a diagram which can help you see. You've got all of this space here where it's going through and processing all these different foods. And then as you can see here, you may not be able to see the text, but this is basically where that detoxing happens. So you can see it in all of this sort of space, this blue space through here. So that's where it's all detoxing through, going into the central vein, so it can then be in some respects taken away from the body, or taken out of the body and excreted. And again, it will get excreted through the large intestine and out through that means, if you will. Again, if that becomes clogged and blocked up, then it's going to back up in the system. So if the intestines aren't working properly and able to move waste products through effectively, it's then going to back up in the system. And again, no matter how well the liver's working, it's just not going to get out of the body, which again is going to create its own symptoms. So this then would expand out. Although I'm talking about the liver, it would then expand out into not only getting the liver working properly, which is done by certain foods, it's also getting the small and large intestines working properly, again, which I've talked about in other videos, about getting those working effectively. So you can pass food through more effectively, which is then going to pass waste products through more effectively, which is then again going to keep the system clean. So where I'm talking about one organ, all of the organs need to work in sync to be able to pass these waste products through. But for now, we're just explaining the liver's role within that greater system. And then finally, once all that process has happened and occurred and detoxified, these nutrients then get transferred into the circulatory system and delivered to the area of the body it's needed. So what's happening is you are putting in food into your body, and then what the body is doing is basically processing and taking out what it needs, sending it to where it needs it to rebuild tissue, to recover tissue, to keep tissues working healthily and effectively, and getting rid of the rest. Now, if we can put in more nutrients and less of just that rest that it's trying to get rid of, our body's going to be more healthy, it's going to work more effectively, it's going to work more optimally, and we're going to get greater health from it. So when I talk about clean eating, I'm not talking about buzzwords. I'm not talking about, trying to get you on some strange diet for 12 weeks. It's very much a lifestyle, and it's based on what I've just talked about, which is elements of your anatomy. So I've talked about the liver. I've previously talked about the intestines and how they work. And in the future, we will be talking about more of the organs and how we get those working effectively as well. So clean eating is a thing. It's just knowing the right foods and the wrong foods, and doing more of the right thing and less of the wrong thing, so we don't get those symptoms. Because again, the symptoms come much further down the line. If we can just not put the foods in, if we just don't put the garbage in, we won't get the garbage out. That essentially is how you can summarize it. Garbage in, garbage out. If you don't put it in, you don't get it out. So put in the right nutrition.